In the electric cooperative world, a member's a member, and they're going to stay a member. And in the broadband world, the customers choose to use you, and you have to keep them, and you have to grow with them. And you really have to get into the data, get in the information behind those members, and know how to serve them. Or in competitive areas, they will switch, and they'll switch for convenience, and they'll switch for money, and they'll switch for quality of service. So there's a lot more to think about, and you really have to be a lot more intentional in the broadband world. It really is a completely different culture. You need management all the way down through those customer-facing employees.
That's Barrett Breeding. He is the Chief Financial Officer for Ozarks Electric Cooperative, and he's talking about the transformation needed to stay competitive in the broadband marketplace. Hello, I'm Terry Vishwanath, the energy economist at CoBank, and on today's program, we meet up with two electric cooperatives that are going to share their strategies on how to transform a startup broadband initiative into a sustainable and thriving business. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and colleague, Tamara Reynolds, a managing director here at the bank. Hi, Tamara.
Hey, Terry. We're going to start off this conversation by visiting with Barrett and Steve Bandy, the Chief Technology Officer at Ozarks Electric Cooperative and General Manager of Ozarks Go. We're then going to continue this conversation with Zach Morgan, the Chief Financial Officer with United Electric Cooperative in Savannah, Missouri. Just a little background on Ozarks Electric. This co-op serves electricity to about 90,000 homes, farms, and businesses in Northwest Arkansas and Northeast Oklahoma. They also serve about 45,000 broadband customers, having only started construction back in 2017. Also important to note that Ozarks is witnessing pretty impressive growth of roughly 2.5% to 3% a year. Our conversation begins with Steve's assessment on how that growth and competition for those consumers changes the game for Ozarks.
I can tell you just day one, starting this project, driving your truck through an area, subdivision out in the rural areas. I mean, you'd be getting signups and people asking. And now that you're getting more into growth areas where people may not be as familiar with you as a cooperative, it changes a lot of things in how you have to compete. A lot of these areas are high compete areas. We've had to change our tactics. How do you market to that? How do you make sure you get a return on that investment? What does that look like? Making sure that your price marks are right, incentives are in the right place. You're dealing with a competition that has different incentives and things that they can offer to the customer. So I think with our analytics, being able to really drill down into that to let us know this can work, we can do this.
Tamara, Steve is Ozark's Chief Technology Officer, so we can probably assume that he's hardwired toward data analytics. But in response to your question about their product offering, he provided a straightforward narrative on how their ability to stay on top of the customer data has enabled the agility to pivot within the marketplace.
And you're seeing customers starting to use more data, doing more in the home, more devices coming into the home. And you also can use that data to look and see if they're getting dissatisfied, if their issues may not be how it's being served, but it may be the limits on how much they're getting. We're able to dig into that and be able to make offerings and see those that may need to increase the speed, and not doing that just to drive a dollar, but to drive an experience. And we've added an additional tier in our speeds for internet. We've added a mid-tier in there of a 500. We've also added a 2,500 over the gig, and we're seeing take rates in that. What was traditionally taking the lower end service, we're starting to see them taking the upper end services and fitting more into the lifestyle of what they want.
The marketplace pivot that Steve talks about has a direct impact on the infrastructure that needs to be in place to serve that demand, but system builds come with a hefty price tag. As rising supply chain costs and delays affect the business line, Barrett responds to Steve's comments about the balance sheet impact.
We've had to upsize our core system, just the ring around our system. That allows you to be able to push your data across and allow for better redundancies and outage control, making sure that you got growth areas that are being able to be served. We look at that, and we also measure really on the bandwidth needs. We start getting to be about 50% capacity, and we start looking at getting new links, new services, upsizing. making sure that we're well ahead of that. Because if you wait too long and by the time you have to get the equipment when you're at an 80%, 85%, you're probably behind. We monitor that in our monthly reports. We look at it daily, hourly, and we have put the processes into place to make sure that that customer experience doesn't change.
Just to add to Steve, from his side, he's looking at network performance and making sure we are able to serve the customer's needs well in advance of them needing that need. On my side, this is where you really have to plan years in advance. It is not inexpensive to upgrade equipment, especially when you're growing. You really have to kind of coordinate between your operations and finance and know where you're going, not just this year, but several years in advance. On the electric side, what the impact on your rates is going to be long term, and plan for it and manage your financial metrics. And then on the broadband side, it really is more about return on those assets and profitability, and when do you break even, when you start making profit on that. Because it's one thing to spend money providing the best service you can to electric members. The minute you move outside of your territory, you need to be very intentional about providing a return to your broadband business.
We talked about the importance of data-driven decision-making in this rapidly developing data marketplace. But the question in my mind was, how has Ozarks' journey evolved?
For a startup operation, there are preconceived ideas about the broadband business that frankly might not prove out. Once the network is up and running, or as the enterprise hits certain major milestones, like encountering competition, moving into different markets, and responding to evolving consumer demands, those analytical needs grow. We asked Steve and Barrett about this, and here's what they had to say.
It's a good question. I mean, looking back at day one, we had X number of passings and we needed to hit this percentage, and these people signed up and you were hitting your financial goals. I think today that is completely switched down to, this is the ARPU off of that growth. Today, it's dealing with attrition. What services have you taken? What's the best blend of those services to offer to your customer? What's the incentive programs that you can offer to compete against your outside competition? How do you engage your employee to make sure that they're selling those types of services? We have a predictor in place that can tell you if someone's disconnected, why they are disconnecting. We're working on trying to be able to put that into the phone system to where when a customer were to call in, we might have an idea of why they may be calling us. They may be calling saying, hey, their service is lagging because of this. They have this number of devices connected. This is the problems they're having. And we've tested that, and it's come back on our initial tests on when we run it back that it's got 96% accuracy. So it's about how are we going to help you as a customer? And I think that's the mindset that we have more as a cooperative. It's more about making sure you have that best service that you expect to pay for. And I think we get a lot of that, from early day one. Hey, we have a passing. You signed up. Great. We're glad to have you. Now we're to the, how do we keep you engaged? We were recently recognized across the state in the Arkansas Business Journal as one of the top providers. And I think that is a great testament to what we've done when you're just in one little area of the state and the state has recognized you as one of the top internet providers in the state. And I think that goes a lot back to the employees on how we really do want to make a difference in their lives and provide that better service for them for the value that they're paying.
When you first start building, you've made the decision to build, right? Now you have to look at retaining all the customers you acquired initially, but then also how do you acquire more customers? And how do you continue to add to that subscriber count? So when a service terminates, like Steve said, we know if they've left as an electric customer as well, and they're moving, to a completely different area of the state or country. So there's no reason to worry about that customer. Most broadband companies just know they've left. We know which ones are still here, and we can look at why we've lost those customers and why we retained others. And then also as people move in, we're usually the first place they call because we're an electric utility. You set up your electric, some of those utilities first, and then your internet. We can get the data and know who's taking services when they move into the territory electrically, and make sure we are doing what we can to capture those customers. So huge amount of data. You can look at it in a million different ways Steve's team's really done well is getting all of that data and making it consumable. So a lot of automation, a lot of dashboards, so that we can actually look at the data and figure out what we need to do. And unless you have the data, and unless you can, really consume that data quickly and efficiently, you're not going to be able to make those decisions at all.
Our next conversation is with Zach Morgan, the CFO with United Electric Cooperative out of Missouri. This co-op has about the same number of fiber services customers that Ozark has, but they've been at it for more than a decade. What's more, they have about 4 times the number of fiber service customers as they do electric members. But let me have Zach share United's story.
Back in 2011, before myself and our CEO got here, we received a 75%, 25% grant loan from the USDA or RUS, a BIP loan. That was kind of meant for us to build out a section of our electric territory with fiber optics. And so we've built out about 1,300 miles of line in our service territory, and it went pretty well. It took us about 2 years to build out. And then about a year before I got here, there was a city or a municipal about half an hour east of us where our G&T is actually located. And they asked if we would provide fiber services to their community down in Missouri. And, they were a municipally owned electric system. So the make ready for putting fiber optic cable there was next to nothing. We were able to go to overhead. And, our take rates were pretty high. And that project was wildly successful. We really saw an opportunity here to help kind of subsidize our electric rate because we had all these communities that we didn't have internet service or very low internet service. And so we felt that there was a path here to kind of subsidize our electric rate by kind of running this as like a for-profit entity. And so that's what we've done. Today we're going to hit 40,000 subscribers in 2025, and we're still at about 10,000 electric meters. So we have about 4 times as many fiber customers as we do electric meters. About 4,000 of those are electric members, but the overwhelming majority are outside of our service territory. We did a rate raise at the beginning of 16, and we were able to subsidize for so long. We finally did our first electric rate increase in July of 2024. So we were able to really bring back a lot of goodwill to our membership.
I'd like to hear that journey as you think about defining success, defining performance metrics for this for-profit business and how that's evolved.
One of the things that we're always looking at is obviously customer counts, right? That's kind of where everything starts. That just kind of leads you to your revenue. We kind of looked at the different packages that customers were taking. Well, we have 5 different package types now, but we'll just go with the 4 that we've had for a long time. We had kind of a lower tier 2 packages like 250 Mbps and then 500 and then 750 and then a gig. One of the things that we noticed was, customers, your programming charge for each customer that signs up, it's the same. You're going to get charged $3 whether they take the lowest package or $3 whether they take the highest package. So then at that point, if you're telling me that if this customer takes the highest package, pays the highest price for this package, but their programming costs that we have to burden on ourselves don't increase, why are we marketing the lower packages as much? That's what we call gross profit or gross margin. What's your revenue minus your cost of revenue? Same thing on the electric side. It's your electric sales minus your cost of power, right? Well, on the fiber side, it's your fiber sales minus your cost of programming. Data specifically has a very high gross margin. We offer voice and TV too. If you can make, let's say, for example, we charge $100 for a gig package. Well, if we're getting charged $3 per customer on our programming, that's $97 of gross profit for that customer. If we sell them a package that's $40, then that's $37 of gross profit. So, we're leaving $30 off the table there, which, times 1 in and of itself, $30 doesn't move the needle. But when you're talking 30,000, 40,000 customers, you're talking a huge substantial difference. And, this is true recurring revenue. That's why we kind of have, a 3-legged stool, essentially. We do customer counts, we do ARPU, and we do monthly recurring revenue to kind of track all those things. So
ARPU, just for our listeners, revenue per unit.
Yeah, that's right.
That's great, Zach. I love the perspective that you're evaluating multiple sort of data points and sort of saying, how are we performing? Has this look like over time, and how does that inform where we want to go as we continue to evaluate where we build out and what we are offering our subscribers in this case, right? I think, one of the things that's relatively unique about what you've done, and Terry kind of picked up on this, is sort of the out of territory aspect. And I think that requires a lot more planning and due diligence before you kind of embark on some of those new markets.
An example of that, Tamara, would be like when we were looking at St. Joe, they were able to pull some just amazing demographic information, like average age of the household, average median income of the household. And then they started kind of breaking it down by polygon, because we've been doing this for almost 10 years now. We've got some consumer behavior out there. We can start kind of seeing, hey, this is kind of what success looks like when you're dealing with these consumers now. St. Joe was a town of 70,000. That was wildly larger than any other market that we'd done. And that consumer behavior was wildly different than anything we'd ever expected. But just look at the ACSI information. We just look at the average age of the person that took the survey. We look at the occupation, the college education, how many kids are in the household, things like that, and that's great. But what that tells me the satisfaction of the age demographic and, the occupation, stuff like that. Well, now I start adding packages into that ACSI information. And now what I can see is okay, that 40, 50-year-old demographic that we just talked about usually takes the highest package. Boom, go, let's go. Not everything's like for like though either, right? Like competition, you may have different competitors in different markets and things like that. Maybe in our northern market, we maybe need like a 35% take rate in that first year, because based off our ACSI information, we see that they take lower packages because they're coming from providers that don't offer as good of a service as we offer. So they're actually satisfied with a lower package because they're coming from a lesser than provider. Whereas like maybe in our southern markets, they're kind of used to that gig, 2 gig service, self-install service. Take rate isn't going to be as high, but the take rate in that market doesn't have to be 35%. It may have to be 25%, or it may have to be 30%, because we can assume that these customers or these potential customers are going to take these higher packages. So we're going to need less signups to actually hit our payback period. So that's just some of the ways that we've kind of evaluated things.
I'm going to break it down a little slowly because you've provided just a wealth of information. So I want to make sure that our listeners have this. You mentioned ACSI, the American Customer Satisfaction Index. That's really going to understand the revenue potential of that particular new market. The other you mentioned with your GIS group happens to be Polygon, the topography of service or the cost of delivering service into that area.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're using existing data from existing customers, matching that up with demographic information in new markets, seeing where things match up. If there's a match there, we're going after it. And we used to not operate like that. I'm sure like a lot of other co-ops, like we're talking about here, it was just build, 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 build. But with all the grant programs coming on, there's a lot more competition. So you have to be a lot more precise and a lot more accurate and a lot more methodical with your projects.
There's kind of a sweet spot on the packages that you're offering. You offered, for example, the trifecta. So we've got data, television, and voice, the 3 that are kind of common and standard. And in some cases have to be offered up, but you're also kind of refining in terms of what the best payback or packages for payback.
Yes. And, I'll give you an example, Terry, with St. Joseph, just talk about TV a little bit. Like if you are offering TV, you can get hit with price increases all over the place. And that programming increase is real. And, if you're not keeping up with those increases, all of a sudden TV becomes a loss leader and it just becomes a loser. And, it starts eating into your gross profit or your broadband margins at that point in time. That was something that we kind of discovered a little bit in the spring of last year of, okay, we need to increase these TV rates. Well, what we also found out, it was kind of a perfect timing thing, especially in our St. Joe market. Our biggest competitor there, they dropped Bally Sports. And in the Kansas City market, that is the only channel that you can watch the St. Louis Cardinals and the Kansas City Royals on. And, most years, Kansas City Royals, it's not something you think about, but they were in the playoff race this year. We assumed a certain take rate for TV, and many, many more people took TV than what we ever anticipated or budgeted for. The programming for it's not cheap, but we've used that as an angle, and we use that data from that to see, hey, we're keeping TV because it actually is a competitive advantage in this very, very large market that we serve.
Ozarks talked about the need to really understand attrition rates. So we asked Zach about this and how to enable recurring revenue. And here's what he had to say.
We've spent some time with some telco companies outside of the cooperative space to kind of really get a good idea of how this thing actually works from their world. I'll just tell you, it's always a race to the bottom. We have a provider here in town. Like I said, we have gig for 100. They're offering it for 35 right now, and that's going to be good for a year. And so there's absolutely no way they're making money on it. But it's not fiber, it's copper, but that's still how they market it. So when I see these competitors offering 3, 4, 5 gigs, it's like it's nothing more than a marketing ploy. One of the things that we do weekly is we do a connect and disconnect report, Terry. So they actually provide the reasons for why they disconnected. And there's about 5 or 6 categories there that we've nailed down that we say are competitive for competitive reasons. But one of the things that I'm actually looking at is, okay, for the people that leave for competitive reasons, what percentage are coming back on? And for the percentage that are coming back on, what's the frequency of that? If they're coming back on within 6 months, what that tells me is the price didn't matter. The service was literally so bad that they came back on. If they're coming back on in a year, what that tells me is that the price increased and they're coming back to us. So we're digging into this right now because I don't want marketing and sales and customer service playing pricing games without us having a full understanding of the consumer behavior.
So how do we retain these customers? Is there a way to make the product sticky?
But even the stickiness, Terry, when you talk about it, like the additional services, like really in the St. Joe market, we feel like the TV is sticky. The thing about TV is it's not just the cost of programming, it's the cost of your staff's time too. Like TV issues take up an overwhelming amount of their time, and that's an additional cost too. That when we talk about these sticky services, especially the commercial accounts, we're also going after the phone system too, because you get the data in, that's one thing. Then you get the phone system in with voice over IP as well. That makes it that much harder for that customer to get off you, because not only do they have to change their data, they have to change their entire phone system. On the residential side, we know for a fact that our customer service is the thing that differentiates us. It's the thing that you don't want to run your fiber operation like a cooperative because it's a for-profit entity, but it does have to have that cooperative feel to it in order to differentiate yourself. Really, the customer service is a huge component. That's the thing that we focus on the most. And I don't just mean the customer service reps. I also mean when the techs are going to the house or when we're doing construction in the field, how we're taking care of customers. We want to treat them like members, maybe not to the extent that we treat our members, because we treat our members very well, but it has to have kind of that feel to it as well. And that is one thing that kind of also really makes it sticky for us.
Much of the conversation we had with our guests was focused on the benefits of data driven analytics in the more competitive fiber market. But the conversation with Zach became incredibly interesting when we talked about the risk of not being laser focused on profitability. That is, taking on too much debt without having a clear understanding of the revenue potential attached to those market growth expectations.
And anybody that reads the Wall Street Journal, I mean, just look at AT&T's fiber build. It is astronomical. They've got shareholders right now that are worried about their debt load, AT&T's debt load. And if the biggest, almost massive telephone player is getting questions from its shareholders about kind of its debt load, imagine what some of the other smaller players are doing, right? So you have to be very smart. So for me, how do we stay nimble? Well, it's kind of some of the analytics that we talked about. In a for-profit environment, even if you're going to get a payback, nobody's just going to let you have it for free. Somebody's going to step on your toes.
Okay, Zach, I'm convinced. The business of providing internet and data access requires a data-driven approach to remain profitable.
Hope you've all enjoyed this conversation and will join us next month when we sit down with E3 principal consultant Kush Patel when he talks about their organization's research that rigorously quantifies the grid and customer impacts of continued data center growth in Virginia, which is the world's leading data center market.
Please join us then, and goodbye for now. CoBank's Power Plays podcast is intended for informational purposes only, and the information should not be used without CoBank's express written permission. The information provided in the podcast is not intended to be investment, tax, or legal advice and should not be relied upon by listeners for such purposes. The information contained has been compiled from what CoBank regards as reliable resources. However, CoBank does not make any representation or warranty regarding the content and disclaims any responsibility for the information, materials, third-party opinion, and data included in the podcast. In no event will CoBank be liable for any decision made or actions taken by anyone, person or persons, relying on information contained in this podcast.